Back in 2018, I announced to you, our audience, that I had given up my U.S. citizenship and, by extension, basically cut off any reasonable possibility that I could ever live in the United States on a long-term basis ever again. And one of the questions that I got asked by people was, well, why did you have to do that if you could have moved to Puerto Rico and enjoyed the tax savings of what was then Act 20 and 22, now Act 60? Well, today I'm going to give you 4 reasons why I chose not to move to Puerto Rico, and you can see whether you should or you should follow my lead. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. I'm the author of this book, available on Amazon, and the founder of Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. And for me, Puerto Rico was not a place where I could go where I'm treated best. Now, let me be very clear, because I think a lot of times people hear me saying, I like Georgia, and then they go and set up a company in Georgia, when I never said that was the best place to set up a company. And sometimes people say, well, Andrew didn't move to Puerto Rico, so therefore he hates it, cut it off, no one should ever go there, and that's not what I'm saying. What I do want to do today is share with you 4 specific reasons why I chose not to. If you've considered moving there and made the decision to move or not to move to Puerto Rico, I'd love for you to leave a comment below and share your logic, and that could be the basis for further discussion. But for me, the first reason simply was, back when I was considering making this move, Puerto Rico was certainly not in its infancy. We've been talking about Puerto Rico ever since the early days of Nomad Capitalist back in the early 2010s. Puerto Rico was really picking up speed back in like 2012, that time. And even when I was leaving the U.S. for good and handing in my passport in 2017, my feeling was, and I told you this at the time, there were more people who were cutting corners going down there. Things were not quite as developed as they were, and you could tell, property prices were not going through the roof. It was still incredibly affordable in many ways compared to what it is today. It was more accessible to people, and so you attracted a little bit different type of crowd. Now Puerto Rico is a bit more mature, and so we have people who have $50 million, $100 million, $200 million who are going there. Some of them who made it all in crypto, but some of them who just made it all through running businesses over the years, and they become incredibly successful, and now they want to go where they're treated best and save money, pay single-digit tax rates or even 0 taxes, and they're willing to put the time in. For me, I just felt like it was, number one, an increasingly popular option. I often like to do things that are not popular. I often like to try things that are different and report on that and just, perhaps have a little bit of space. You always had some relatively blue chip people going down there, but now it's become increasingly blue chip. I've seen that. I don't hear from nearly as many people today saying, can I just get in a cigarette boat and escape somewhere else and actually live in the U.S.? They won't find me. Now what I see in the people that I'm talking to, the feedback that we get, and just the general makeup from everyone I know who lives there, is that you've got a higher level of respectability and a price point to match. That's the first reason I chose not to move to Puerto Rico. I just wanted to kind of stay out of something that I saw being increasingly popular. The second reason I chose not to move to Puerto Rico is pretty straightforward, is that for me, Puerto Rico is a great stepping stone to figuring out what you want to do next. I don't talk to that many people who say, my dream is to live in Puerto Rico, and I'm going to go there and live there for as long as I can. If you're 25 years old, there's going to be a time in your life when there are no tax incentives in Puerto Rico. And so you're going to have to figure out something eventually. Now, I've had 1, maybe 2 people come to me and say, this is where I just want to live. I love the lifestyle, I love the weather, I love, in their case, the women, and hey, this is just a great fit. It just so happens I can pay practically no tax. What a great coincidence. What I often talk to people is, listen, I want to renounce my citizenship, but I don't feel comfortable, so let me kind of go down there and see how I feel and do that for a couple years. Or, hey, let me go down there for a couple years and rack up some time, maybe sell a business, sell some crypto, do whatever, make some money trading, and then I'll come back. It's a place where people are doing it in many cases because they like that connection to the U.S. Hey, I want to see my family in the U.S. I have some business to do, whatever the reason. Now, for me, my goal when I left pretty much permanently back in, 2013, my goal was not to come back, and I held out for the most part, not even flying through the U.S. If I was flying from Asia to, remember, our first conference in Cancun back in 2015, I flew through Vancouver, and a much more pleasant experience than I would have flying through the US and going through passport control just to transit and all of that. I avoided the US like the plague. So my goal was not to, keep as much time in the US as possible, where I looked at the foreign earned income exclusion for being a business owner going overseas, and there are two different tests. One allows you more time than the other. And I was saying, I'm going to take the easiest one because the amount of time I want in the country is 0. It was not for me originally, how do I move overseas and reduce my taxes? For me, the tax savings were, again, kind of the happy coincidence. I don't want to live here. Oh yeah, let me figure out these taxes. And that's the journey that I've been on for well over a dozen years now, and figuring out how that works. I think that for me, the goal was not to maximize time. I think if you want to be outside of the US, Puerto Rico, listen, for some people, may simply make sense. I was not at the time one of them. If you're building a huge business and you want to go down there and you want to avoid capital gains, fine. Again, that ties into the wanting the US, whether it's wanting to go back or wanting to keep the citizenship. But for where I was at the time, it just wasn't really the biggest priority for me to be able to spend that time in the US, or again, to be able to eventually hold on to the citizenship. So I think that Puerto Rico is a great way to kind of dip your toe in and still be able to come back to the mainland more than you would through some of the other exclusions. It's really the only way, other than expatriating, for some people who have a lot of capital gains. And so it's that connection to the US, which I simply didn't really want or need. The third reason I didn't move to Puerto Rico is that while there are a number of different ways to hit the days test, the amount of days that you need to be there, physical presence test in Puerto Rico, for me that number was too much. Again, C point number 2, just didn't want to be in the US. What I had talked about shortly before I renounced was the idea of the trifecta, which a lot of you are now following, where you spend roughly 4 months a year in different places. Now, there are some ways you can spend less than 6 months in Puerto Rico per year, and you could perhaps do a sort of modified trifecta where you're in Puerto Rico and that's your most substantial home. You're more there than you are anywhere else. For me, there's just so many places out there in the world. One of the things that I've learned in the last couple of years is I like to have a little bit of seasonality. I don't want to have tropics all the time. And so there are certain places that I love. So historically, I've loved living in Malaysia. Malaysia is not as open right now, but I loved spending time in Malaysia. And so if I'm spending time in Puerto Rico and then I'm doing my 4 or 5 months in Malaysia, well, now I'm not getting the kind of seasonality that I want. And I think that's something that people should pay attention to. There are issues people tell me that are concerning to them, and it's everything from time zones to I want 3 months of winter, or I want fall, or I want to wear sweaters. And the more I travel, the more I realize that a lot of people start out craving that tropical lifestyle, but as they go on, they want to live, like something like I do in Bogota, where it's almost never warm. You're always wearing a sweater, even in June. And some people want that, right? And so I think that, being tied to Puerto Rico for a good amount of your year, having the conditions on when you need to be there, having, numerous tax tests that you need to meet, having the limitations on the US, which again wasn't the issue for me, it kind of ate into time I wanted to spend other places. I mean, if you're giving up half or close to half of your time, that's 50% that you can't be exploring, which in my business is very important. I want to know what's going on in the world. I want to explore new places. I want to deepen my ties to other places. And especially if you're running a business, in Puerto Rico, you really should have your business in Puerto Rico. But if you're running an international business, it becomes hard for a number of reasons, not only potentially the tax reasons, but if you need to be other places, it's just dragging you down. And so recapturing whatever number of months you would have to spend in Puerto Rico, I think, is worth it for, again, what I'm trying to do. A lot of people are running online businesses, or they're investing in Bitcoin, or they're trading stocks, and Puerto Rico is a great option for them. For my goals, as someone who wants to be very global in nature, both in my business and for me personally, it was just too much of a commitment. The fourth reason I chose not to move to Puerto Rico is there is less flexibility when it comes to social situations, and for a lot of guys, that means dating. And so I was single when I expatriated. I've worked with a couple of single guys in the last year. I had a guy about 6 months ago who is American. His girlfriend is Mexican. Not sure if they want to get married. And she can't get a green card. She can't get a K-1 fiance visa. She can't get a spousal green card. She is, for all intents and purposes, nothing. As the U.S. Embassy will tell you, you're single, you're married. There's really no in between. Oh, well, we're in love. That doesn't cut any ice with them. And so she was going to have a hard time getting a U.S. visa. Even with a U.S. visa, assuming taxes weren't a concern, I don't think she had income or assets, but assuming that wasn't a concern, she still can't just live there all the time, and she can't reliably, go to Puerto Rico, go to the U.S. every year. You got to spend all this time, and so the question was, are you either going to marry her and get her the visa, get her the green card? Okay, now she's in the tax net, and maybe that causes some complexity for someone living our lifestyle. Maybe that's going in the wrong direction, but okay, you can do that. But are you willing to get married? And so from my perspective, the idea was, again, the amount of time you'd have to spend in the U.S. Just wasn't interesting for me, because it was cutting into the ability to go and spend time and meet people, both friends and from a dating situation, the kind of people that I wanted to be around. Now, there's plenty of good Americans, and obviously the kind of people that are moving to Puerto Rico these days are kind of people that you'd be interested in talking to. But for me, and especially at the time, it just wasn't really a fit. I wanted to be in countries where I just got along with people better. And, I think that in a dating situation, that has to be considered. That what are you going to do if the person or people or prospective people that you're looking to meet and have in your life aren't able to come to where you are for give or take half a year? How does that affect things? And definitely something that you want to consider. So those are 4 reasons that I chose not to move to Puerto Rico. Again, I'm saying that you should do what works for you. And maybe you're saying, listen, I'm married. I don't need to date a Russian or a Colombian or a German or an Indonesian woman. I'm happy to spend time there. I would love to go and play golf and sit in the sun, and I don't have a problem looking for sweater weather. I do want that time back in the U.S. because I do have strong connections. My business does require it. I don't need to be in Serbia or Malaysia or Peru to grow my business. And if that's the case, then this is absolutely possibly a viable option that should be on the table. But I do think it's worth considering and learning from others, why this may be good or why it may be something that you want to pass on. So people ask, Andrew, how do I get the most out of Nomad Capitalist? How do I begin my Nomad Capitalist journey? The first thing people do is they start right where you're at. They watch YouTube, they listen to podcasts, they read articles at nomadcapitalist.com. We've spent years creating thousands of pieces of free content so that you can get the vibe from someone who's actually done this, from someone who's actually been in your shoes. What they'll do next, they'll get a copy of the book. You can find it on Amazon. It costs a few bucks, and while it's not going to give you all the secrets, it's going to, again, give you more of the vibe. You're going to learn a lot of the things that I've learned. You're going to learn some strategies you can employ, and you're going to get a lot further in your journey. From there, if you are the 7 or 8 figure entrepreneur investor, you can go to nomadcapitalist.com. You can click Become a Client. We're pretty busy these days, but we have availability to help a limited number of people who want to create a holistic plan, something that I think is so important. So if you want to do that, go to nomadcapitalist.com, click Become a Client, learn more about how it works and how we can help you.